Hello everyone! Today is another MU chart video, and today's type will be water. Water is a very good type, obviously in the metagame, arguably one of the best types in the game. Some people call it the best type in the game, but whether you think it's the best or one of the best is up to you. For the purpose of this video, I will be covering it as a neutral type, and just talking about it objectively versus all the other types, because you could just say, oh, water just beats every type, and just has a +2 match against everything, but in reality, matchup-wise, that's just not necessarily true, and a lot of it is due to inexperience and just inability to match certain archetypes of water. So some types might be weak to certain archetypes of water, like some types might be weak to rain, but have a good matchup against balance. And some types might be good against rain, but not have a good matchup against balance. It's because of water's many archetypes that it's very good as a type, and why it is one of the top types, because it can just check multiple matchups and just have so many different matchup spreads based on its based on which one it is. So for the purpose of this video, I'll be covering rainwater this time around, because this is the most common type of water. Balanced water and stalled water I'll cover in separate videos, but just to make this more clear, I will put it in here that I will be doing rainwater, because the MU chart for rainwater, balanced water, and other forms of water is going to be very, very different. So without further ado, let's just talk about rainwater and how it impacts the metagame. So first we'll start off with bug. Bug is a type that gets pretty much obliterated by water, so I would say it's a very winnable matchup. So rainwater, you obviously just put out Pelipper, try to keep it healthy though, because you will need it multiple times in the game, because 4 turns of rain isn't enough to sweep the entirety of bug, and you also have to constantly worry about Araquanid, but that shouldn't be that much of a problem thanks to Pokemon like Kingdra, who should sweep the entire type with ease. You also have Rapid Jab or Urshifu, who can just come in at any time and just pretty much knock out a Pokemon for free. And like I said, Araquanid just gets worn down by rocks, and even if it does have heavy duty boots, it's still extremely easy to wear down over time thanks to Kingdra and the fact that it can't really do anything back to many of your Pokemon due to them all being water types. Especially if you have Toxapex on your water team, which most rain teams should have. Toxapex just helps a lot in that regard. So yeah, most likely you won't have to worry about this matchup at all. But it is possible for you to lose due to the fact that Galvantula is a Pokemon that exists, and also if you're not super experienced in the matchup, you can very much lose it. So you have to be extremely careful with how you handle this. But it is very winnable, and it doesn't require a ton of rain power, but you do have to stay on your toes a little bit, because bug users will be prepared to deal with you. Next up we have Dark. So Dark, extremely winnable matchup, because Urshifu pretty much almost destroys the entire type by itself. And besides Urshifu, you obviously can just spam your stab against most of the entire type. The only person that really resists it is Hydreigon, and Hydreigon gets worn down extremely easily, so that won't matter too much. But yeah, for the most part, you just kind of just spam your stab against the Dark for the most part, and there's nothing Dark can really do about it. And Urshifu, just even beforehand, you just had like Keldeo to deal with stuff, but now Urshifu is pretty much like one of the best Pokemon on water, and it just completely eviscerates this type on its own. So you really don't have to worry about this matchup at all. Things that Dark can do back, potentially. Bisharp can be kind of a problem if Urshifu's not on the field, obviously, because it can stop your Pelipper from defogging if you run defog on your Pelipper. Even if you don't run defog on your Pelipper, or if you're worried about, or if Bisharp is just like regular default Bisharp with no Swords Dance up, it's still very easy for Dark to just mess up. Dark, it's a very uphill battle for Dark to win this matchup. So yeah, I don't really need to talk about much more of that. It's just really bad for Dark, and you have a very easy time winning. Just literally spam your stab. Not much they can do about it. Dragon's a winnable matchup. tentatively even, as I explained. So, Kingdra, as you would expect, literally claims a Pokemon every single time it comes in rain. There's not really much Dragon can do about that because it doesn't really have, like, besides like Dragapult, it doesn't really have a Pokemon that can really outspeed Kingdra in the rain. And Scarf Dragapult, while it does obviously still do that, specially defensive Toxapex has been on the rise, especially on rain teams, to deal with special attackers. So, because of the rise of specially defensive packs, you're probably going to end up seeing a lot of Toxapex just coming in on your Draco Meteor and just taking it with ease. And there's not really a ton you can do about it, so you kind of just have to hold that L. As the Dragon player, of course. But yeah, besides that, Dragon just kind of gets washed, for lack of a better term, by water completely. Ice Beam, Draco Meteor on Kingdra is obviously a big threat. Urshifu just clicks Close Combat, can click Surging Strikes whenever it wants to too. Even though it's resisted, it still does a crap ton of damage against a lot of a lot of Dragon types. And there's also the fact that it has Aqua Jet to pick off some really nasty threats. It's just generally not a great matchup for you at all. Still winnable for a Dragon player though, because you obviously have access to Kyurem, who can be a really big problem, especially if you get rid of Pelipper properly. If they get rid of Pelipper properly, so you have to be careful with your Pelipper in this game. Also, Kyurem is very dangerous against water in general, so you should try to be careful with this mod. Especially if they use like a substitute freeze dry set, because that can set you back a lot if you don't deal with it properly. And if your Pelipper is gone, you might end up sacking a lot of Pokemon to that Pokemon, so I would suggest you be careful with that. Besides Kyurem though, there's not really a ton of other threats on Dragon. Obviously, Dragon can still like run over you offensively as a type, if you're not running a Azumarill. Because like Dragon has a lot of Dragon Spam that they can just use, and your Toxapex can get worn down, especially against Dragapult. If the Dragon player is smart, this matchup is winnable, but by default, it's still pretty difficult for them to win. I'd say it's even though. I wouldn't say it's like super brain dead easy, but you still have to think a little bit while using this against Dragon. Electric. So this is one of the few matchups Rainwater doesn't just win really easily. And it's mainly because of the fact that Pincurchin can just kind of come out, and basically go into any Pokemon it wants to. And the Electric user will almost always get a kill. It doesn't really matter which Pokemon comes in, they will get a kill. So you basically have to keep your Pelipper healthy the entire game, and then run over them with Kingdra or Seismitoad, and just play absolutely immaculately with those Pokemon, because otherwise you lose really hard to Raichu Alola, who can OHKO your Seismitoad if it's offensive. He can literally run over your entire team once Seismitoad is also gone, because he outspeeds every single one of your Pokemon except for maybe Barraskewda if you use that. And even Barraskewda can get checked by other Pokemon on Electric. Actually, nah, it doesn't really get checked by that much on Electric, but yeah, actually, because Barraskewda is so good, I would say it's a winnable matchup. You still need to be careful though. You still have to be obscenely careful, especially with Raichu Alola, because that does make the matchup really rough. But despite all that, you will have a pretty easy time beating Electric, which is really weird considering how Electric has the type advantage, but it's just the way the metagame is right now. Barraskewda can literally flip turn on any Pokemon it wants in the rain, and then it can just send in Seismitoad, it can send in Urshifu, it can literally just do whatever it wants. And there's nothing Electric can really do about it, besides like set webs maybe, to try and slow down some of your Pokemon. And if you get affected by webs, you have to try really hard, so yeah, it's very easy for you to set webs against it's very easy for Electric to set webs against you, so I would definitely say it's an even matchup. It's anybody's game, and it can be kind of volatile, but if you don't get rid of webs properly, or if you don't manage them properly, you will get absolutely eviscerated by Electric. But if you take care of it properly, you shouldn't have a problem. But yeah, Electric can be kind of rough. Fairy gets absolutely beaten down by this archetype. Azumarill is pretty much the only thing that stops this from being like a +2 matchup, because it does resist Water Stab really easily, and Kingdra can't just like use any of its coverage moves to really beat it out. That being said though, Azumarill still gets heavily worn down by the other Pokemon on this type, such as Seismitoad and Urshifu, because Urshifu can still crit through screens, so Azumarill isn't necessarily safe once it's behind its own screens, and all you have to do is just get it below 50% health, which isn't super difficult even with screens up, because your damage output is ridiculous in the rain. So all you have to do is do that, and you're resistant to Azumarill's Aqua Jet, so it won't really OHKO you. Especially Kingdra, who literally quadruple resists Aqua Jet, and can probably do a bunch of damage back. So yeah, Azumarill isn't like super much of a threat. It is a resist, but it can't really do much in return. So, but if it's a choice band set, it can do like some work on your team and get rid of some key threats, which is very not fun for you. But also, you have to worry about Hatterene, who can use Trick Room at any time and totally dismantle your team because of that. And that's pretty much the biggest threat on Fairy, but Hatterene can obviously get run over by your stab and by priority and by your powerful Pokemon in the rain. Hatterene can get run over pretty easily, but it is still a threat. That and Azumarill are both the biggest threats to your team. But besides that, this is basically a free matchup on preview, especially if you play properly. Fighting? Yeah, I'd say you pretty much completely beat Fighting. Because if they're not running Virizion, Fighting can't really do anything about Barraskewda and, Urshifu. There's nothing Fighting can really do about those two Pokemon. Because Barraskewda just clicks a Banded Psychic Fangs against the entire type, and if Urshifu comes in, you just switch out to Toxapex on the Sucker Punch, and then it's locked into Sucker Punch and it has to leave. And then from there you can just Toxic another Mon, you can wear them down, you can put down Toxic Spikes if you have that on your Toxapex. You can just do whatever you want against this team, and you basically just win for free. It's really just kind of brain dead easy. It's really hard to not lose this matchup. There's not really much Fighting can do back to you, besides like maybe play obscenely well with Hawlucha, because Hawlucha does outspeed most of your Pokemon, but it doesn't outspeed Barraskewda. Even Adamant Barraskewda outspeeds Jolly Hawlucha by like 3 points, so Fighting just really struggles to beat this type offensively. So as long as you offensively run over them and don't misplay, you can pretty much win against this type for free, because even Como doesn't really do anything against you, because you have Kingdra in the rain. But yeah, don't even try to lose to that type. Fire is also pretty free. Yeah, you have such a huge type advantage, and even if they set up Sun, you still have like Seismitoad to like threaten out most of their Pokemon with, and you have rocks on their side as well. And Toxapex can just Toxic pretty much every single Pokemon on that type and not really worry about anything. If they have Salazzle, that can be a little bit problematic, but like it's essentially free. Basically, whoever gets the weather up first has the slightly better advantage, but if you get it up first and you kill their Torkoal at any point in the game and you still have Pelipper, you've essentially won. So yeah, this matchup is pretty free. Don't really have to worry that much about it. Flying, you absolutely eviscerate Flying because of Kingdra, plus Urshifu and Barraskewda. Flying really can't do much about any of those Pokemon. Like, you just kind of click buttons against that type and it just kind of works. Balance Flying can potentially deal with you because it does have access to Mantine, who does have Water Absorb and can stop the water spam significantly. But if you're not running that specific archetype, if the flying user isn't running that specific archetype, they basically just lose at Team Preview. But with that archetype, there are a few. Well, no, Mantine does like do quite a bit of work against water because Urshifu Raging Strikes doesn't work, Kingdra Spam doesn't work, Urshifu can't use Close Combat because Mantine resists it. You also, Barraskewda does do some damage with its other moves, but not enough to break through Mantine. And you also have Dracovish, who gets stopped by Mantine as well. Unless it's Choice Band, then you break through Mantine easily. But yeah, Balance Flying does have a little bit of a better matchup against this type, but you still wall their Mantine with Toxapex and you force it out with that thing. And you can just wear down, well, you can't really wear down Mantine that easily. But if you run like Thunder Punch on your Urshifu, or if you Toxic their Mantine at any point in the game, or if you set down rocks, well, they have heavy duty boots, but essentially Mantine can be dealt with if you're a water user using other moves on your Pokemon. But that being said, that is one specific mon on a specific archetype of flying that isn't super common. So with that being said, you still have a really easy time against this type if they don't have Mantine. If they have Mantine, it's probably +1 or even. But yeah, you do have a really easy time against most flying teams. Ghost. I'd put Ghost as +1 because Ghost still does have relatively decent resists, especially the Super Rain Killer Jellicent, who can become a little bit more popular now thanks to more defensive Pokemon and the return of Marowak allowing for a more balanced core to exist. But unfortunately, even with this new balanced core, Ghost still kind of gets worn down a lot by the other bonds on the type. And Kingdra still does an obscene amount of damage to Jellicent despite its water absorb and its specially defensive nature, obviously. Because even though Jellicent completely walls Urshifu and does a really good job walling other Pokemon, it's still weak to physical attacks, and your physical wall options kind of don't work very well, especially in the rain, because Corsola can get beaten down, and most teams don't really run a Grass Ghost type because those Pokemon are very underwhelming. But yeah, Ghost is kind of in a rough place because the Ghost metagame hasn't been super developed as of yet, as of the time of this video being made. But assuming that not assuming, but because of the way that the type still functions as I see on the ladder, haven't really seen much tournament footage of this game, but from what I've seen on the ladder and what I've personally used, I've seen that Ghost is still mainly offensive, but I'm not sure if the defensive mechanics of Ghost have been fully realized as of yet. That being said though, Rain does beat a non-balanced version of Ghost, because if they don't have Jellicent, they get completely run over by Water Stab Spam, and there's not really much they can do about it. If they do have Jellicent though, I would definitely say it's an even matchup, but without Jellicent, it's a +1, and most teams are not using Jellicent or a Grass Ghost. So next type we have is Grass. Grass is actually one of your hardest matchups. So Grass actually has two things that really help it out a lot. It has access to Appleton, who is fantastic at stalling out a majority of the Pokemon on your type on water. If your Kingdra is Specs, you're gonna have a harder time against grass, because if your Kingdra is Life Orb, you're able to actually cause Appleton to go through multiple 50-50s about whether or not you're going to use Draco Meteor or Ice Beam. Because if you use Draco Meteor and the Appleton protects, they're going to go into Ferrothorn the next turn, Leech Seed for free on one of your Pokemon, and then just collect HP for free, essentially. And that's not exactly something you want, and it allows your Kingdra to get worn down even further once they put down their own hazards, and that just results in some not fun things happening. That also being said, Sungrass can still be slightly problematic, but Sungrass actually is problematic for you specifically, because if they kill your Pelipper at any time, Sungrass completely eviscerates your team in return. Not only does your stab get weaker in the sun, but you also have to deal with Pokemon like Venusaur who completely stop, who don't get completely eviscerated by Urshifu or by Barraskewda, and Venusaur completely outspeeds your entire team without the rain. So without your Pelipper, if you sack that, or if you don't play around it carefully, or play with it carefully, you will end up losing it, and you'll end up losing the entire match as a result. It's still tough to break through Grass's defensive core as well, even in the rain, but that's the only reason this isn't -2. It's because you do still have very good offensive pressure that Grass has to stay on its toes with, but you're not going to have an easy time dealing with this type. Especially if they have Appleton and Ferrothorn as their defensive core, because those two Pokemon alone can potentially 6-0 your entire team. And there's not really much you can do about that. This doesn't mention the fact that they also have Pokemon like Whimsicott who can just completely stall you out with Leech Seed spam, Leech Seed substitute spam, as well as Encore. And as I mentioned before, Sungrass and Celebi, very painful things for Grass to deal with, but yes. Sungrass and regular Balanced Grass both have very good matchups against water, against rainwater specifically, so take that as you will. Next up we have Ground. Ground, you absolutely win. No questions. Even if Excadrill somehow manages to get Sand up, you have plenty of Pokemon that actually check it. Swampert allows you to check it instantly as well. And you still have to make Excadrill go through multiple 50-50s unless it's a Rapid Spin Sword Stance set, which if that's the case, this matchup goes to an even matchup, because Excadrill can literally just destroy you at any point in time if you don't predict properly. Also, if you let your Pelipper get worn down immensely, you kind of just lose. But yeah, even with Seismitoad and Gastrodon, and having access to those two Pokemon, you can still wear down Gastrodon quite a bit with a Draco Meteor and such. And I've been seeing a lot of people using 2 water immunities just to deal with rainwater a lot, and that's actually kind of effective, because Seismitoad takes the physical hits from a Pokemon like Barraskewda and such, and then Gastrodon takes the hits from the special attackers like a Kingdra, and that basically allows them to somehow deal with rainwater spam. Now, if that's good against most other types, I don't know for sure, but it does do decently against rainwater, so that makes it kind of +1, in my opinion. But just know that you do destroy them very naturally if they don't have specific C-team measures. So, yeah. Ground's still a very good matchup for water to deal with. Ice. Ice is probably even. And this is probably one of the most volatile matchups you're going to experience as rainwater. So the reason why this is even is because Ninetales, Alola, Lapras, and other popular Pokemon on Ice have access to Freeze Dry, and Freeze Dry is a pain in the neck for water to deal with. because it basically is super effective against the water typing, and it's stab on their part. So basically they're going to do a lot of damage to basically all your Pokemon just by spamming their stab. And that's not fun for you, especially for Pokemon like Seismitoad, because he's quadruple weak to that due to his ground typing. So Ninetales Alola is going to be one of the most painful Pokemon you have to deal with, because not only does it stop your rain, but it also can potentially kill your entire team if you're not careful. Aside from that, you still have to worry about Kyurem, who has choice specs and can just spam Freeze Dry as well as Substitute spam. Galarian Darmanitan is also still very much a threat, with a Icicle Crash isn't really that much of a threat thanks to Toxapex, but you do have to worry about its other moves like Earthquake. You also have to worry about a lot of other things as well with Ice, but just in general you have to be careful with its stabs, and also Ninetales Alola. But if you do manage to go around Ninetales Alola properly and actually threaten it out accordingly with proper play, you will be able to beat Ice completely, because it doesn't really have that much defensively. That being said though, that's very hard to do, so I would say Ice is a -1 matchup, because Ice, despite it being not that good offensively, it still beats you out offensively pretty easily. So you have to be careful with how you play against this type. Actually, I'll still make it even. I think -1's a bit much, but you have to respect this type when you go against it, because you will lose if you're not careful. Alright, next up we have Normal. Normal doesn't particularly have a lot of things that you can deal with it. Yeah, Normal can't really deal with this type, because you do have Indeedee. Normal has Indeedee to deal with, but Rainwater specifically just kind of like Barraskewda just kind of clicks buttons against the type. Pelipper just kind of comes in, comes out, and they just get 3 turns of doing whatever the heck they want. Not to mention that Urshifu just kind of clicks close combat against the entire team, and there's not really much they can do about it. So yeah, not very fun for the water user. For the normal user at all. So yeah, you kind of just win this automatically. You just kind of click buttons against the type, and it just works. And even though they have the defensive core of Porygon 2 and Chansey, Chansey gets bopped by Urshifu, and Urshifu still kind of beats Porygon 2 very easily. Just make sure not to get paralyzed by Discharge or to get worn down by Toxic or anything. Just don't get super reckless, and you'll pretty much win every time. Not a hard matchup for you to win at all. Poison's a little bit harder. So they have access to Vileplume, and Vileplume is the bane of your existence, because not only does it stop Urshifu completely, and it also can just completely OHKO Barraskewda despite it having a super effective move against it. Vileplume can literally just Strength Stab Barraskewda, and get its health completely back while wearing down your Barraskewda's attack stat. It can also Giga Drain your Barraskewda and just kill it outright. It can also just put your Toxapex to sleep at any point in time. It can Leech Seed instead of Sleep Powder. It can just be a really big pain in the neck, and you don't want to deal with it. So, because you don't want to deal with that Pokemon at all, you're going to try and play around it as much as you can. And it's very possible to do that, because you have Kingdra. And even if they don't run Vileplume, because a lot of Poison teams are switching over to Amoonguss now, Amoonguss still isn't much better, because it has Spore, which is guaranteed sleep against any of your Pokemon, and that cannot be good. You would go into Pelipper, but that means having to deal with Toxapex and Regenerator Amoonguss, and the Regen Core is not super easy to deal with, because Amoonguss still kind of clicks Giga Drain against a lot of your Pokemon, and especially defensive Toxapex comes in on Kingdra quite a bit, and can just recover off of any Draco Meteor you pull on it. So, not exactly fun for you specifically, but you should still have, it's not like unwinnable, it's not hard to win, but it does require smart play, so it is +0 for now. But just know that if you don't, if you're inexperienced with Rainwater, it's going to seem like a -1 matchup, but in reality, it's not that bad, because playing around Vileplume is just like getting good at the game. So if you manage to play around that one threat on their team, you should be able to win this matchup just fine. Otherwise, you're going to have a really rough time getting past that Mon, but once you get past it, it's really easy to win. Next up, you have Psychic. Psychic, probably a winnable matchup. So, the reason I say this is because Balanced Psychic and Offensive Psychic both get kind of bopped out by Urshifu's nonsense. Because if you run Scarf Urshifu on your team and ban Dracovish on your Rain team, basically, you completely beat out Alakazam, who is one of the few physical checks that can stop one of your Mons from going crazy on their team. And even Balanced Psychic, who has access to Slowbro, kind of just gets Draco Meteored on. And Jirachi will get worn down very, very easily, so it can't tank those all the time. So, because of those features, Psychic is kind of an easy matchup. You do have to be careful though, because obviously Psychic can also take away your Pokemon just as easily as you take away theirs, because once the rain goes away, Psychic can just click buttons against your entire team, and there's nothing you can do about it. So yeah, you do have to be careful, and you have to make sure Pelipper stays alive more than any other matchup in the game. So I'll actually put that even because of how dangerous that is, because in the rain, it's a +1 matchup, but outside of the rain, it's a -1 matchup. And that is not pleasant for you to deal with, so you have to be extremely careful about how you handle this. Next up we have Rock. Rock is a +2 matchup because Rock has no water immunity. Moving on, last type we have is Steel. Steel is a +1 matchup, I feel, because you have Urshifu, who clearly is one of the biggest threats to Steel. I mean, Keldeo was a huge problem for Steel beforehand. I can only imagine how obnoxious Urshifu must be, because Urshifu kind of just clicks close combat, and if Aegislash comes out, it just Searching Strikes. Ferrothorn gets worn down easily by other Pokemon, and it's just not very fun, because Ferrothorn is probably the biggest thorn in your side when trying to sweep Steel. But Steel just kind of doesn't have much going for it that allows you to stop the offensive pressure you just wear down on them. But yeah, Steel, not very pleasant. And yeah, I think that's the end of the end of the MU chart. So, as you can see, Rainwater has a ton of winnable matchups and almost no losing matchups, no outright losing matchups. The only type it potentially loses to were, as I mentioned before, Electric, Grass, and possibly Psychic, and Dragon to an extent. Every other type is basically a free matchup, and it's really, really not good that Rainwater is this powerful. I personally think that needing to nerf Rainwater is probably ideal, but the way to do it would probably be getting rid of one or two Pokemon, and obviously the one people point to the most is definitely Urshifu Resurging Strikes. I personally think that I don't really have any personal thoughts about what should be banned and what should be banned, but obviously the problematic Pokemon are Dracovish, Urshifu Surging Strikes, and probably Barraskewda to an extent, because of how fast it is and how much it just stops other fast offensive Pokemon from checking water types. So I think those Pokemon are the ones that we should be looking at if we're thinking about somehow nerfing this archetype of water. But yeah, this archetype of water is extremely strong. And this is just rain. This isn't even balance or stall water. This is just rain. And I'm gonna just a little spoiler for the next video. Balance is not going to have as many winning matchups as this archetype has. So yeah, just be careful out there when you're going against rainwater. There are multiple checks, because even though it may look like there's basically no way to beat this type with most types except for grass and electric and dragon, it is still, and also poison to an extent. The even matchups are still anyone's game, but the ones that, all the positive matchups, as you can see over here, these types can still potentially win if you run certain C-teamy strats to deal with rainwater, because that's how metagame development works. You have to deal with what's strong, and you have to find ways to check it. I mean, some types like rock and fire just can't do anything about it, and also fighting. There's nothing they can really do about it. There's no amount of smart play or set play that they can really do to stop water from completely destroying them. But types like bug, ground to an extent, and even steel can work out some sort of sets and some really smart play to actually win their matchups. Because after all, these are winnable. These aren't like auto wins. These are very winnable matchups, but the very winnable matchups, the amount of very winnable matchups are mainly against like lower tier types and mid tier types, but the higher tier types all usually tend to have very decent matchups against the rainwater, and that's probably why most people aren't that worried about it. But I definitely do feel for the regular ladder random, it's very hard to deal with rainwater, and I can definitely see why, because of the amount of good matchups this archetype has. But without further ado, I think that will be the end of this video, so thank you all for watching. This has been Nambernan, and I will see you all next time.